This video comes from Happy the Artist. The title, How to Paint Fabric Oil Painting Tutorial. Hopefully they have some useful tips. I also have some things in mind. For me, the absolute most important is that you simplify. You need to simplify because otherwise you can just get lost in all these little tiny details and completely lose track of those big forms that really make up the texture as a whole. Hopefully they will talk about that, but let's see if they have some useful advice for painting fabric.
I painted this in about 2.5 hours from a really cool statue that lives in our studio.
Just right off the bat, I don't know how detailed this is going to go, but to kind of lay this in, I think 2.5 hours would be too much time. One of the things here when it comes to painting any kind of textures, you want to be quick, you want to be swift. That's going to help to ensure you stay focused on the big shapes and that you're actually going to have that sense of urgency so that you really get these big blocky shapes in place.
There is one main light source using a standard cool white light bulb shining from directly overhead, and a secondary warm orange light source shining from the lower right. So having one strong light source is absolutely crucial. That's just going to help to define the forms. It's going to make things a lot easier for you. In recent years, it's become a very popular trend to use these different colored light sources and to have an accent light with some kind of warm or cool color. I don't think it's really adding much. It usually has this kind of strange color, and that's what a lot of people, I guess want to paint these days, but I don't think it really adds much in terms of making it look alive, which is the most important. So my recommendation is to just have one strong light source, one big key light. That's gonna really help to ensure that you see those different shapes and you're not getting caught up with these other variables like the temperature change or this accent light even at all. As with painting any subject, it's important to always be aware of the direction, color, and intensity of the light source. An accurate handling of the highlights and shadows on the fabric wrinkles will help it look more realistic. And the way the color of the light interacts with the color of the subject has to make sense.
Yeah, so with both of those things considered, it's going to be important that you have a good light source because that's going to help to define what you're seeing. And then that secondary light source, as you pointed out, the color there is very important, which is why I would advise against using such a color, because it's just going to make things too complicated in my opinion. What does it really offer us?
So when the blue cloth on the lower body mixes with the warm orange light, they end up creating more orange heavy colors closer to the orange light source and more bluish hues further away from the orange light source. And they will both create an intermediary type of gray in the areas in between. So when you mixed two complementary colors like orange and blue together, you usually end up neutralizing both colors into a grayish zone.
Yeah, that's a good point right there. Forget about the painting for a second. Just having two complementary colors next to each other means that they're going to have high contrast. And if you mix them together, if you blend both those, they're actually going to neutralize each other. So that's just a good thing to keep in mind whenever you're working with any kind of color, when you're working in your painting. It's good to keep a complementary color nearby in case you need to soften up whatever colors you are using.
The next thing to consider is abstraction. In class, we learned that no matter what we are painting, we first need to learn how to observe the subject we're looking at through the lens of abstraction.
That's a good point right there. That's what I was really hoping for. And this is, my number one tip is to simplify. You got to see those big abstract shapes. You got to see the more geometric type shapes and how you can simplify this whole thing to make the process easier for yourself. Otherwise, it's very easy to overcomplicate and get trapped in the details.
A great example of the importance of abstraction is when we paint eyes. Typically, we think of the human eye as this kind of football almond shape, but if you render eyes on a human that are shaped like perfect footballs, it comes off looking very unrealistic.
Yeah, that's a good point right there. A lot of the facial features and anything related to the portrait is often difficult to kind of see without that personal lens, I guess. You know, some of the easy ways to ensure that you are focusing on those bigger shapes are to, first of all, move quickly. If you don't have enough time to get stuck in details, you're going to have to go for those broader, bigger shapes. Use broader brushes. If you're using a very wide brush, you can't get as many details as if you're using a very small detailed brush. And if you are using that detailed brush, it's going to be difficult to actually paint broadly. You're going to be stuck in the details because you can't make those broad marks. Finally, I would recommend simplifying your palette. Your palette is also an area where you can get trapped in the details. If you just have a few really good mixtures that work together, that's going to make it much easier to just lay it in the places where it makes sense and not spend too much time trying to find the exact right mixture.
But what are we supposed to fill these shapes with? The answer is our next tip: values.
Again, you know, she's hitting on that point that I just made about the palette. If you're focused on the values, you're going to have an easier time to actually figure out where to place these different mixtures rather than focusing on color, where you're going to kind of get trapped up and not really see the big picture.
I guess the general rule of thumb is no matter if it's a highlight, midtone, or shadow, all the values closer to the light source will generally be lighter than all their corresponding values that are further away from the light source.
That's pretty true. The one sort of inconsistency I think there, or the one thing where you could try to actually manipulate the values, is not only are the values going to get darker when you move further away from the light source, but you're generally going to have lower contrast. So you could think about this in terms of creating the focus. Whatever is closest to that light source is going to have higher contrast and the lighter values. And then as you move further away, it's going to get darker and have lower contrast.
So just be careful to not render all of your highlights using the same intense bright colors and all your shadows using the same intense dark colors. We want to always factor in the distance between the section that you're painting in relation to the light source.
Yeah, that's a really good point. A really good point.
We shouldn't just paint long, thin lines. Instead, we should incorporate some shorter perpendicular brushstrokes to help break up those long, thin lines, to help prevent the fabric from looking like noodles, and to help preserve the impression of a single unified sheet of cloth.
Yeah, that's a good point right there. That's a really good point. You don't just want to put everything in the same direction. There's a certain natural order to these things which you need to observe. Getting abstract is also going to help you to have that sort of natural randomness. So getting abstract, simplifying, that's going to help you. But then on top of that, you can consider if you have, you know, too much of these lines all going in the same direction. You want to put something perpendicular that's going to help to break it up. Another good way to break those up is to use sandpaper or your palette knife and just scrape down, allow for some blending, allow for some more movement and some textural differences as well. So that's the end of it. All I really have to add here is just that you should simplify as much as possible, take distance from your subject, use brushes that are going to force you to simplify, so use broader brushes than you might be comfortable with, and try to move quickly. That's going to help to just ensure you're not getting trapped in these details. Something like fabric or anything textural, I think, is best represented when you're moving quickly, you're moving swift, you try to imitate the pattern and this sort of natural movement rather than imitating the exact photocopy of it. If you want to get, you know, this exact photocopy, you're going to lose a lot of that fluidity. You're probably going to get trapped in details, and in the long run, you're going to suffer for it. So try to move quick and, you know, be open to what you're actually seeing, and try to imitate that in terms of movement in your own work. So yeah, that's basically all that I have here about fabric. Let me know if there's any videos you'd like me to react to. If you have any questions, feel free to leave that in the comments. And with that being said, thank you so much for watching and have a great rest of your day.